In this episode, we will do an introduction to testing in Python. Python includes a couple of built-in modules for testing your code. These two methods are called doctest and unittest. We'll be starting out with the doctest module. So let's look at an example. I have here a little test called dtest1. And notice we have a doc string that looks like it has code from an idle session. So you'll see that it has the triple sideway caret signs, and it's actually calling double with the number 4 and the number 9. And then you also see that it has the output. So what this does with doctest is when you run it with doctest, it's going to run what's inside your doc string. So let's open up a terminal and try this out. Let me just grab this thing and we'll give it a go. Let's see here. So we'll cd into documents and code. And now we just need to run this. So we do run with Python. And we want to make sure we use Python 3-m doctest dtest1. And notice that there's no output. What that means is that the test ran successfully, but it's also kind of boring if there's no output. So let's just see if we can get a little bit of output. If you use -v, that makes it output in verbose mode. So now we can see what it's doing. So it does trying, double 4, expecting 8. OK means that it ran successfully. Then it tries the next one, expecting 18. OK. 1 item is passed, 2 tests and 2 items. 2 passed and 0 failed, so your test passed. Now if you want to try this another way, we can go in here and we can make this get screwed up somehow. So let's make this 19 and save it, and then we'll just run it again, and it should have a problem. Alright, so it does the first one and it passes. It tries double 9, expecting 19, and we get a failed example. And tells us exactly what happened. It looked for 19, it got 18 instead. So this time, our test failed with 1 failure. So with doctest, you can basically make tests in your doc strings and run it that way. Of course, then your doc strings are going to be very, very verbose and very long if you have a lot of complicated tests in them. But anyway, this is one good way to go about doing stuff. Now you can also run doctest within the module itself. So if we do if name equals main, you can actually call doctest in here without calling from the outside. So let's import doctest and do doctest.testmod for test module, and we'll set verbose mode to true, and we'll try running this. So run the module. As you can see, it does the same thing, but this time it's doing it within the module, so you don't have to call the module with with Python like we were doing in the terminal. And as before, it's still failing because we still left that failure in there. So that was pretty cool. You can also run doctest from a separate file, so you could import the module and then run it a slightly different way. But we're not going to look at that. Instead, we're going to move on to unit test. Alright, so for unit tests, we'll actually take a look at using test-driven development to use the unit test module. So typically, for your test-driven development, you write the test first, and then you write code to pass the test. So here's a test that I created based around the game of bowling. So the idea here is that we test for all ones in our particular game. So we roll basically 11 times with a score of 1 each time, and then we assert equal to game.score, and it should be 11. So this of course will fail because we don't have the game module in here yet. So let's go ahead and create a game class, and then we'll try running this real quick. So I have some game code that I'll just put in here, and we'll save it, and then we'll try running it. So run this module, and we immediately get an error. So let's see what's going on here. Type error, int object is not iterable. So what this means is that we have a mistake in here, and it's basically that we're passing an integer and trying to iterate over it. So let's take a look at our code. So let's see, soft.score for roll and num of rolls, and then we add 1 to the number to the score. So what is num of rolls? So game.roll, num of rolls is 11. So this is obviously not going to work because you can't just iterate over an integer, which is 11 in this case. So we just need to change this code up a little bit and see if we can make the test pass. So in this case, what I meant to do was wrap this with the word range so that we'll roll in a range of 11. Now we try running this again and seeing if it'll pass. So let's try running this. Oops. Ran one test and it passed because it says OK. So this is kind of the whole idea of test-driven development. You write your code, or you write your test, and then you write your code to pass the test, and then you run it and see if you've got written your code correctly. If you have, the test passes. If it doesn't, you'll see an error like you did before with my first example. So anyway, that's kind of how you do stuff with unit tests and test-driven development. Let's go ahead and create a couple of other examples in this particular test. So right now we're just testing all ones. The cool thing about unit tests is that you can just keep adding new tests to it. So we'll go in here, we'll add another test. In this case, we'll test for strikes. Now strike is 10 plus the value of the next two rolls. So we want to test with a frame of 10 plus 5 plus 4, or 19. And then the second will be 5 and 4. So the total score would be 19 plus 9, or 28. So again, we're just going to do this with a game roll and an iterator, and we're going to try to make sure that the score is 28. Not particularly interesting, but you know, this is how it goes. And actually, we want to change the first test too. So let me change that really quick. Let's see. All right. So now we create our game object. We create pins 1 through 11. We roll, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So now we need to fix our code to match this test, because if we just run it, we're going to have a bunch of problems. Well, let's go ahead and do it anyway. All right, save it and run it. And yeah, it just completely fails. So we definitely need to fix up the code up here, the game code. All right. I'm going kind of fast here because there's a lot to cover. But I just want to show you that you can have lots of tests in one function, and then you write your code in another class. Let's paste this in here. Oops, I did that wrong. Let's try that again. Okay. Can't seem to copy the C in here. All right, so we changed our class up a lot. Now we have a much bigger roll function, and we also have pins figured out by default. So this is pretty complicated. I'll give you a minute to read through it, but basically we have self.pins that holds the default pin list, which is 11 zeros in this case, right here. And then down here we create a new pins list that's full of only ones for this particular test all ones case. So that part should still work. Then for the strike part, we had to add additional logic so it could accept what pins were strikes, basically. So we want, you know, well, anyway, let's just look at how this code works. So we have the scores, the correct position in the self.pins list. That's what this is. These are the scores, basically, or the pins, I mean. And then we just basically have to go through the whole thing and see what happens. So let's just go ahead and run it. It's a little bit easier to see if you run it. Run the module. It runs, it prints out some output, and it shows that there's two tests that got ran. And if I drag this up a little bit, you'll see the OK printed. So we're doing really good here. Now we have one third and final test to check out. All right, so with the unit test, you can actually put in a setup function. So let's go ahead and do that. Oops, copied a little bit too much there. All right. So in our class, we now have a setup function which will create the game. Depending on how you write your code, you can also create a teardown function. So if you needed to set up like a database connection, you do it here. And then you have a teardown function or method that would tear down and close the connection. And we don't need this in this particular case, but that's what you would do. As you can see, we've also added a new test for a spare. And that's what this part does. It looks to see if you've gotten a spare, which basically is you've gotten all the pins but one, and then on your second roll you get the last pin. So if we run this, I believe it will end up with at least one error, possibly more. Let's go ahead and do it because this is useful. Okay, it runs and we have a failure, which is what we expected. Test spare does not work right now. So let's go ahead and fix our code one more time and see if we can get it to work correctly. Okie doke. So let me just grab this code. It's gotten fairly lengthy and complicated. So I'll be including the code for you to read later. Let's go ahead and get rid of this and paste this in here. Alright, so now we have a class. Everything's the same except for now we have a spare begin and a spare end. And we have to create a spare that sums items together. And then we just check for various things. So if the pins equals 10, that means we basically got a strike. If spare equals 10, then we've got a spare basically, and then otherwise we just add it up. So now we basically have everything that we need, and if we run it again, it should pass. 11, 24, and 28. Ran 3 tests. Okay. Alright, so now you know how to do test-driven development using the unit test module. You notice it has a couple of dots here. If you know anything about nose tests, which is a third-party testing library for Python, every time you run nose, it'll print out a dot for every passed test. So I think that's where they got that from. But anyway, there's a whole big testing group in Python, and there's all kinds of modules you can use for testing your code, from coverage.py to mock tests and much, much more. And there's other libraries in Python that are worth looking up. In fact, Python 3 has a mock library that you can use. So I just recommend checking out the doctest, the unit test module documentation, and of course the other documentation for all the other testing modules that are included in Python and out in the universe of the Python packages index. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned a lot. I'll see you guys next time.